Welcome to the Football Insiders. Michael McCleary from Argus Leader Media, Jason Andera, Midco Sports, and we get together every week and break down high school football in South Dakota. And you've seen a couple weeks of South Dakota football now. Just overall impressions as you're getting ready for the season, what you've seen so far in South Dakota.
Boy, there's a lot more talent than I guess expected coming in. I expected there to be some good football, but there's already been 2 top plays on SportsCenter. I mean, this is nationally. I mean, how does it get any better than South Dakota football?
Yeah, you asked me the first time we had a top 10 play. King Gary caught that one. He's like, that doesn't happen very often in South Dakota. I'm like, no, that doesn't happen very often. The very next week, Michael McCleary's video went to #1 on SC. Top 10, and let's start right there. We'll start in 11 AAA. We'll do a little recap of last week, but let's start with that game, part 1, part 2, and part 3. O'Gorman took on Roosevelt. That was an interesting game.
Yeah, it was one of the longest games I've ever been to. The first day wasn't really that eventful. It was just a lot of rain and an empty field, and
everybody was warmed up and ready to go. But yeah,
and I watched most of the rain play out in my apartment building, just kind of seeing it on the radar and things not looking so good. So yeah, I mean that was strange, and both teams did their pregame speeches, did their warm-ups. Everybody was ready to play. We were about 30 minutes out from the game, and then everybody was told to evacuate the stadium. And basically within 2 minutes of that announcement, it started to downpour. So, it was pretty crazy how everything played out there. But I mean, it ended up being a good game in the end. It took a while to get there, but just interesting.
Yeah, it was just a side note on that. There were also a couple other games in the area that were being played, and Hanson was playing Garrettson. That got postponed as well. There was a game in Beersford where they actually played it. They actually didn't finish the game till after midnight. It was crazy. They kept postponing it, but that game got played. The O'Gorman game got postponed and then postponed again. They got one half in. So what were your impressions of the first half of the O'Gorman-Roosevelt game on Monday?
Well, we talked about it a little bit before the show. Obviously Roosevelt came out probably the favorite in this game, but it became very clear that it was going to be a battle between the 2 young quarterbacks and Bennett Dannenbring and Jackson Brower. And Bennett Dannenbring really showed a lot as a runner, and then he got better over the course of time as the passer. So, in the first half, Roosevelt ran the ball really well with Tyree Nave. He made some really nice plays and broke free of their only touchdown in the first half. But Jackson Brower threw the ball probably a lot more than we expected, and he threw the ball probably better than we expected too. So it was interesting how the 2 quarterbacks kind of showed inverse in terms of the impression that they made. Where Bennett Dannenbring probably showed more as a runner than I thought coming in. And Jackson Brower, who we knew was a good athlete, showed a lot more as a passer. And he's young, and they both made mistakes, but I think both of these teams have good things to build off, and 7-6 after that first half, I mean, it seemed like it was going to be a close matchup throughout.
Yeah, we had 2 quarterbacks making their first varsity start ever. It was apparent to me that the defenses were a little bit ahead of the offenses. There weren't many sustained drives. There were some really good plays by both teams, but weren't many sustained drives in that first half, so it really came down to a missed extra point. They tried for 2 on a trick play, and Roosevelt didn't convert, so it was 7-6 at halftime.
Yeah, and like you said, there were a big play is followed by 3 straight incompletions. Right. It just, a lot of drives halted after, maybe some momentum was gained by one team or the other. So that was a little bit disappointing probably for the offenses, and obviously both teams, probably leave that game knowing that they have a long way to go.
Right.
But O'Gorman, finished that game pretty strong, and that block in the back call, I mean, head coach Jason Poppinga, he said after the game, if that call wasn't made, this game wouldn't necessarily have been that close, I mean, they would have kept that offensive drive, and that last Roosevelt touchdown wouldn't have happened. So, O'Gorman was firmly ahead, and then Roosevelt made that one last push, but, the Knights looked pretty good in game 1.
I thought time had run out for Roosevelt when they couldn't attack in that fourth quarter with about 6 minutes left. And they got the ball one more time, and give them credit. Jackson Brower, made a nice play into the end zone, found a guy for a touchdown, got it within a 2-point conversion, and just couldn't capitalize. So for them to squeeze out a couple of touchdowns, great. For them not to quit, that's great. There's a lot of positives going forward for both these teams.
Yeah, and we alluded to this a little bit, but the two big plays of the game were David Alpers in the first half, who made just, not to be cliche, a miraculous catch.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
It was,
It needs a nickname, by the way. That play needs a nickname.
Yeah, the catch right now we're going with. But if anybody has any better ideas, just feel free to send them in. But he bobbled. He was really, really tightly covered and just managed to get a hand on it and keep it in the air and just bobbled, and finally came down with it. Caught it off his helmet. He looked like David Tyree there. So it was really impressive, and that led to a touchdown for O'Gorman, which really got their momentum going. And then after 24 hours of waiting, that big touchdown at the end of the game from Bennett Dannenberg to Manny Struck. Yeah. That was the play of the game, and it was probably the best throw that Bennett Dannenberg made all game. Struck said that his legs started to go numb, but he just kept on running. So once you got those two plays, those were really the differentiator when it came to an O'Gorman win.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more from both of those two teams. Let's change the game. Let's go to Jefferson's first game ever, taking on Washington, the most storied program probably in all of South Dakota, especially for big schools. And they came out and you know what? They made some big plays in that game, which I think both coaches knew that there was big playability, but then we finally saw it with Talon Ashley breaking one off.
Yeah, and Talon said to me after the game that if Washington was surprised by how well they played on offense, he wouldn't be surprised because he was too. And early on in the game, Jefferson really came out of the gate really, really quick. And Talon Ashley broke that big run. Then they got a passing touchdown as well. It was a really impressive first half for the Cavaliers, and they started to slow down a little bit on the offensive side and maybe showed some gaps on the defense. But overall, really, really strong performance for Jefferson. In their first ever game, it's pretty miraculous how together they played after such a short amount of time together.
I agree, and the biggest surprise for me is how well that offensive line held up against a strong Washington front three. Washington made some plays. Abraham Myers was in the backfield quite a bit. Kendis Ledbetter was, but they didn't bust the whole game up, and Jefferson was able to play 4 quarters with a much smaller line.
Yeah, and the benefit for Jefferson and the thing that they're holding their head up about with the offensive line is most of those plays from Washington happened at the beginning of the game.
Right.
They broke into the backfield. Ashley had some trouble. He had to run a little bit in the beginning of the game, but over the course of time, he started to have a little bit more time. And it didn't necessarily lead to more offensive production, but Ashley definitely did look comfortable as a quarterback in the backfield, over the course of the game as it started to go on.
Yeah, and moving forward, Jefferson gets to play the defending champs. Let's turn the page to the preview for this coming up weekend. A couple big games, especially on Saturday, but let's start with that Saturday game in Brandon Valley, their first home game back. They came off of a 14-0 win against Rapid City Stevens, where they got up early in that game, and then it was a stalemate through the rest of the game. But now they see a team in Jefferson with some really electric athletes. How do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, well, obviously Brandon didn't go to Stevens and really, really destroy them. It was only a 14-point game. Obviously not allowing a team to score, that's always impressive. Yep. So the defense is looking pretty good for Brandon. But, I think Jefferson kind of showed us last week that they're going to be a little bit of a problem within AAA. They got some really, really good playmakers. Their defense looked really solid. And, one of the things I talked to head coach Vince Benedetto about after the game was, they do something in practice called victory scripts, where they kind of run through the practice and just run through 4 quarters of game situations. And, it sort of is just a perfect game plan played out over the course of 4 simulated quarters. So I kind of joked with them after the game, like, you guys don't really know what to lose, what it's like to lose, because that always ends in a win.
Yeah.
And their first game ended in a win. So, if that's something that they'll definitely have to confront at some point of the season, and Brandon might be their early challenger when it comes to that. But, Jefferson looked really, really good, and I don't expect this to be a game that's lopsided at all. I really think it's going to be a very, very close game throughout, and maybe the game of the week.
Yeah, just exchanged some messages with head coach Matt Christensen of Brandon Valley, and he he basically said we won a gritty game for Garrow. That's how he talked about his game in Stevens, where they got up early. They were really never out of command in that game, but they never put them away either. And I think they feel like there were some plays left out that they could make some noise. Jordan Johnson ran the ball well. They had a sophomore running back who came up big, but Noah Thompson came up with that big touchdown. Other than that, they're going to need some more electric plays to go toe-to-toe with Jefferson, and I think they might have that in store coming up for the Big Pigskin Classic.
Yeah, and I do have to give the plug. Some of the information I was talking about with Jefferson, that's available in the Argus Sports' Sunday feature for Jefferson. I spent a couple days with Jefferson, went to their practice, so check that out if you can. Just sort of following them through their win, and it sort of informs a little bit about how they're going to come into this game, and how they're going to go about the rest of their season. So
we'll definitely check that out. That's awesome. Another big game coming up this weekend. We've got the number 1 Harrisburg Tigers playing on Saturday against O'Gorman, and it's interesting. When I talked to Jacob Knuth, he said, we were just talking about some contenders in 11 AAA. I was talking about Roosevelt and Brandon, and he brought up O'Gorman. He said, don't sleep on O'Gorman. This is a team that I really like, and I think it's going to be really tough. He expects this game to be closer, I think, than the rest of the state does. So a lot of respect there between Harrisburg and O'Gorman.
Yeah, I think Jason Poppinga kind of fooled us a little bit by saying that his
he ever does that. Come on.
That by saying that his line might not match up to Roosevelt. You see the size difference, but they held up every bit on, I guess, Monday and Tuesday.
Monday and Tuesday. They have strong DNs.
Yeah.
Some of the strongest DNs in the state.
Absolutely, and they got some big playmakers too. So, obviously Harrisburg is sort of the undisputed number 1 at this point. Jacob Knuth is the best player in the state until proven otherwise. But O'Gorman is going to be a challenger to a lot of people this year. And, if Harrisburg is not to win the state championship this year, O'Gorman's going to be one of those teams who's right in the mix to, kind of take them off the top.
I totally agree. I think that's going to be a lot of fun coming up Saturday. A couple other games just to mention. Watertown takes on Lincoln. Lincoln got an impressive win against Central last Saturday. Rapid City Central plays Washington on Friday night. We'll have that one on Midco Sports live from Howard Wood Field, a pair of 0-1 teams that are looking to get off the schneid. We're not sure what we're going to see from either team, so that'll be a statement game for both of those two teams. And then Stevens takes on Roosevelt, which could be another interesting one. We're going to find out how real is Stevens, how real is Roosevelt. Another couple 0-1 teams. Any comments on any of those games that interest you?
Yeah, well, like you said, Stevens did not get beat very badly by a very good Brandon Valley team. So it's interesting to see, especially Roosevelt probably coming off a game that they don't necessarily think that they played to the best of their ability. And obviously there's a lot of room for growth there with Jackson Brower at quarterback. It'll be really interesting to see how this game plays out, because if it's close, then, maybe both these teams are either, we don't, if it's
right.
Being close is really the only way that we don't learn anything more about either of the teams, because, say Roosevelt comes in and just absolutely dominates Stevens, maybe that says something about Brandon too.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's really interesting. Like this game, which, is a little bit under the radar, just, being, teams that are so far apart.
Yeah.
It can really tell a lot about the AAA landscape.
One thing I think we know about Stevens is they've got a really good defense. Their linebackers are among the best athletes that I've seen. They really gave some trouble to Brandon Valley. And they couldn't run the ball very well last week against Brandon Valley, even though they've got Uriah Glenn, one of the top running backs they feel in the state. But they were able to turn to the pass and were able to get into the red zone several times. They didn't punch any in. But that'll be interesting to see how they come back, run pass versus a team like Roosevelt coming up this week. All right, let's move to 11 AA, where we've got a tie at number 1. T-Area with the upset, I guess, on the road against Brookings, and they did it in dominating fashion. And then Yankton absolutely dominated the game against Huron, and both of those two teams receiving number 1 votes, and they tie overall. Do you have a lean one way or the other who you think might be the top team going forward?
I think I think my lean, obviously early in the season, when it's not,
Yeah.
there's really
Nobody's going to hold you to this, Michael.
Exactly.
But what do you think?
But early in the season, I think it's most impressive what T is doing, especially after getting promoted. I'm promoted from 11A a year ago. So, that would probably be my number one, just based on early impression out of the gate. Wow, they're really doing well. And, they got some pretty solid playmakers too. I mean, they got 3 wide receivers over 6'2".
And they're fast.
Yeah.
This is a faster team than I thought when I saw them on the field.
Yeah, and they're not. I don't think they're going to throw the ball a ton. They made some plays in the receiving game, the other day, but Cale London, who's their quarterback, 3 of his 4 incompletions were interceptions.
Right.
So he's got to work on not turning over the ball like that. But that passing play is sort of just something that's just in their arsenal, not necessarily the thing that's gonna carry them.
I would agree wholeheartedly. I think Cade Schenzel is gonna make those big plays in the field, but Jackson Weber and his speed, and then the defense has always been good under Craig Clayburgh, but I feel like they really stepped up and made big plays on defense. They didn't hold Brookings down, but they made big plays on defense, just like Brookings' defense did. So, yeah, definitely some areas to shore up on their team. Yankton, on the other hand, from start to finish, took down Huron. Rugby Riken steps up as the full-time quarterback this year, and I think he really stepped up. And Tyler Solar and a lot of those other guys, a lot of talent on that offensive side, and then the defense, holds Huron to just 2 points, basically a shutout. So I think Yankton right now, I voted Yankton ahead of T, and that's because in the preseason I had Yankton ahead of T, and so I kind of moved them both up. So I think you can make a good case either way.
Yeah, and Yankton's used to being this good at this point of the season. So
a couple years down, but for overall in the last half decade, they've been a top team.
Yeah, for sure. And last season they were great. So it's something that probably given the edge to T just based on how much they've impressed me early on. But Yankton is going to be a good team, and those at this point it's almost no use picking between the two because if those teams ever match up, it's going to be an unbelievable game.
I think it'll be really good. T this week has Sturgis come to visit. Sturgis lost to Watertown in the first week, and that's another thing we don't know a lot about in 11AA is Watertown and Aberdeen coming down from AAA to AA, and both had relatively easy games in the first week. How good are they going to be? Aberdeen will test themselves against Yankton this week, and I think that's going to be one of the top games in the state this week. So both T and Yankton get some decent tests this week. And then Pierre is the other team. I can't believe we've talked this long about 11AA and haven't brought up Pierre yet. What were your impressions of the Governors going against maybe the best team in the state?
Yeah, and Harrisburg week 1 is a really, really tough matchup. And Pierre did
really
not
tough.
Pierre did not look bad for a long period of time. And obviously Harrisburg's offense sort of just blew up. And that's sort of the difference in the game. But, Pierre came out of the gate really, really strong early. And, obviously they have, a really, really good quarterback. Their receivers can make a lot of plays. And their defense, they got a bunch of young guys in their defense.
Yeah.
One of their sophomores, obviously makes Lucas Coleman on the defensive line. He had 2 sacks. He's just a sophomore. Cade Kaiser was their top target in the receiving game. He's only a sophomore. They're going to be good. And, with how sure they are at quarterback and, I really think that they're going to be in the mix with those tops teams in the 11A.
Yeah.
And, maybe we're not even talking about Yankton T at the end of the season.
Right.
Pierre probably can go right back to it within the next 2 weeks or so.
If Pierre doesn't start the season out against Harrisburg, they're probably still the number 1 team, honestly.
Probably.
But T and Yankton were so impressive.
Yep.
I think that's what hurdled them up. So I think it's going to be fun to see Pierre. They're going to try to bounce back against Mitchell, and that's no walkover. They got a nice win against Spearfish at home. This will be a tougher matchup for them. So some good 11AA matchups. Let's move on to 11A now, where we had the number 1 and 2 teams go at it between Canton and Del Rapids. Canton looked like the number 1 team. I thought they did what they were supposed to do. They had a new quarterback, and Tuttle did a great job. They had several different running backs explode, and their defense was really key. So I think Canton looked like that number 1 team. Any impressions from you on 11A?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Canton is at the top until proven otherwise. They run the ball extremely well. Junior linebacker Bo Williams, he had 10 tackles in the game. I mean, they got some strong playmakers on the defensive side.
That was their biggest question is how do you replace Zach Richardson, one of their leaders they've had for several years, just making plays at linebacker, and there's a good start.
Yeah, absolutely. They look like they filled all their holes nicely, and they're going to run the ball really well, and obviously scoring 28 points, basically only having like 56 pass yards or so.
Right.
That's pretty impressive. So they're gonna put up some numbers this year.
Lennox in 11A had a big comeback win versus West Central. They were down 13 points with 6 minutes and 13 seconds on the clock when they got the ball. They were able to score 2 touchdowns, scored that last touchdown within a minute of the game. Stephen Christian had a huge day with 6 catches, 176 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And Lennox was the team that was kind of an afterthought almost, but after watching what Braden Wolf did, and I don't think West Central is going to be out of the talk here, but I think Lennox might be a little better than people thought.
Yeah, for sure. And, they obviously came alive late, and, that's something that you want to do over the course of the season as well. So, they'll get better for sure, with a new quarterback that's, always going to be a learning curve. But, their late game surge might be telling of how they're going to improve over the course of the season.
I agree. And a real game of interest for me this week in 11A is Sioux Falls Christian takes on Milbank. 2, again, just outside the top 5 type teams that could both make a big statement with an impressive win this week. You've talked to Sioux Falls Christian a little bit. What are your impressions of the Chargers this year?
Yeah, so they had a little bit of difficulty in the offseason with Brooks Nelson, their returning quarterback. He dislocated his foot, and then he got a little bit sick, which set back his rehab a little bit. So they got Tate Snyder taking reps at quarterback, but Isaiah Young, is
he blew up last week.
Yeah, he's the dominant member of this offense. He got honorable mention All-State last year. He wants All-State this year, and with his performance in Week 1, it's hard to doubt him. So that's a team that I'm really keeping an eye on. It's a game that I'm going to be at this Friday, Sioux Falls Christian against Milbank. Sioux Falls Christian is going to be a problem, this year.
Just from my perspective, this Milbank team returns about 8 starters on offense. 2 of the most impressive running backs that they've had in this program since back in 2009 when they won it all. I think these guys are moving in the right direction. Caden Krause doesn't have to throw the ball a lot, but when he does, he definitely can move the ball. Bennett Schwinn, Marshall Volts, a lot of these guys are just big problems at running back. And with Brian Allmendinger being there a couple years now, I really feel like Milbank's moving in the right direction. This could be, a check mark on the way to rising toward the top of 11A if they can give the Chargers some type of a challenge in this game. All right, let's move to 11B now. Man, you look at 11B and there looks like maybe one title contender in this class. Winter took on the number 2 team in the state and won 44-0. And this has been a rivalry that's been, within a touchdown here or there over the last couple of years. That's a statement game.
Yeah, winner.
Winner. Chicken dinner. Yeah, big win for them. Joey Cole ran all over the place, got a couple touchdowns. It's really hard for me to find another contender right now in Winter's field. If they're that much better than Bridgewater, Emory, Ethan, it's really tough to find. But there are a few 2-0 teams in 11B, and I don't know, are there any that jump off the page for you that might be a nice story, at least to start the year?
Yeah, and there are a couple surprises. Aberdeen, Roncalli, Clark Willow Lake, and Jim River being the main ones. But Aberdeen, Roncalli, I feel like we sort of expected them to be a little bit better. They only lost 3 starters, and 2 of them were linemen, so they got a lot of skill players returning. And that's a big step for them. In terms of I'm starting the season 2-0. Like that's about as good as it gets for them. But Clark Willow Lake, they moved up from 9-man last year, And, so what they're doing early on is extremely impressive. They got some really big guys on the line in Avery Nichols, Tate Burke, Zach Winter. And, that was one of the things that they were keeping an eye on because, with 9 men, you got to fill in a couple more places on the line. The way that their line played early in the season and the way that they've played just overall, they've been the biggest surprise and probably the most impressive 2-0 team so far. So, they'll find themselves within the rankings, the next couple of weeks.
I think they're definitely going in the right direction. And Jim River, for those of you who don't know, that's a new co-op between Menno and Scotland. Both 9-man teams got together and they just qualified for 11B, and they're off to a 2-0 start. So we'll have to keep an eye on them. Let's go down to some of the 9-man classes. There's a few teams that, for me at least, have been under the radar to start the year. We're a couple weeks into the season for the small schools. Castlewood start with a big win over North Central and then beating Britton Hecla, and then their running back Carson Kerwan, he has been absolutely electric so far. So for me, Castlewood's been one of those surprise teams. Chester area I'm not quite as surprised by because I saw this kind of coming. I thought maybe they were this year's Viborg Hurley team or this year's Platte Geddes team were going to come out of a 500 season and really compete for a title. But boy, they've come out and absolutely put some numbers on the board to start the year.
Sure.
Anybody else in 9-man football that you want to bring up?
I feel like we have to mention DeSmet again, who had just had another dominant week. They got really, really good playmakers, as we mentioned last week, and they're in 9AA, they're going to be a big problem. And Garrettson, obviously had a big week.
Mm-hmm.
They dealt with the postponements, so who knows, what happens within those next couple of days? You never know.
Yeah, they're going to have a short week. Coming off of a short week, they just played two really tough teams to start their year.
Yeah,
and they played them both pretty close.
Yeah, absolutely. And their win the first week was obviously huge win for them, and that sort of moved them within the rankings of AA. It sort of gave people a little bit more attention to Garrettson as a 9-man sort of power within the top 5. But yeah, so other than those teams, it's sort of, it's everything's sort of played out how you sort of expected.
Yeah, we're still getting a feel here. I think Hanson's another team to watch. They were the team that beat Garrettson. They really ran the ball well. You got Jackson Jarding, you got Hadley Wallace, you got some of these guys, Brock Tuttle, who had a huge week. I think against Garrettson, I wrote down here, 252 yards rushing in that game. So I think Hanson's a team we're going to have to keep our eye on. A couple big games this week to mention. Canastota Freeman takes on Howard. Those two have been playing really close games the last couple of years, and the Pride come in 1-1, but their only loss, a close one to Platte Geddes. And then Howard starting off with a 2-0 year. They've moved Jay Syfor out to more on the outside. He used to play nose guard and center last year. He's playing D end and a little tight end this year, so I'm looking forward to see how some of the young guys play with Jace Syfor getting some more action. And then another one I want to keep my eye on in 9B, because 9B, we've had a different number 1 team each of the first 3 weeks. We might have another new number 1 next week. Right now, Sully Buttes is number 1. They take on Lyman, a team that's in a taller class once again. And I think they're probably not the favorites in that game. I think Sully Buttes could be one of the teams that we're talking about in 9B at the end of the year. But it's just going to rotate at number 1, I think, in 9B. And one of those teams that could make a claim is Avon takes on St. Mary, 2 teams that are maybe in that top 5. But 9B is going to be it's going to be a crazy class this year to watch. Tell us what you're covering this week, Michael.
Yes, so Friday, as I mentioned, I'm going to be at Sioux Falls Christian versus Milbank. Obviously, that's a big game for the Chargers, and Milbank is going to be right in the mix there as well. And then Friday, I'm heading over to Harrisburg, maybe to see the best team in the state take on O'Gorman, who I was pretty impressed by in Week 1. So, those are both going to be great games, and definitely follow that coverage Friday and Saturday.
Excellent. And I'm going to be at Washington, Rapid City Central. Usually we hang out at the same games, but we're going to mix it up a little bit this week so you can get more coverage for more games. But yeah, we'll check out Central and that big offense and defensive line that they have against Washington. We'll try to get their first victory live on Midco Sports and Midco Sports Plus at 6 p.m. from Howard Wood Field. And then Saturday, I will be going to Brandon to see Brandon play their first game, home game of the year. as defending champs against Jefferson, and I think that game starts at 7. I think the Harrisburg game starts at 6, or maybe I have those backwards. One starts at 6 and one starts at 7, so I might try to hit a little bit of both.
I believe Harrisburg starts at 6 p.m. So,
okay, so I might hit the first quarter of Harrisburg before I mosey over to Brandon Valley. But either way,
I'll see you there.
I will see you there, Michael, and it's been a lot of fun. Make sure next week, if you have any questions for the show, we're going to add a little segment, and if you want to put Michael on the spot or me on the spot, just send us your questions and we'll remind you next week on Twitter. But for Michael McCleary of the Argus Leader, Jason Andera from Midco Sports, see you next week.